Hello, everybody. Welcome to Hoot episode 39. Istio Ambient Service Mesh with Gloo Mesh. Yay, we're back with another Hoot episode about Ambient Mesh. If you remember, about 2 weeks ago, we've done Hoot episode 36, 37, 38. It's all about Ambient Service Mesh. We talk about common questions people ask about ambient service mesh. We talk about what ambient service mesh means to your wallet. Today, I'm so excited to have Nina join me to discuss some of the integration work she has been doing with Istio Ambient Service Mesh with Gloo Mesh. Nina, can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. So I'm Nina Polshikova. I'm a software engineer on the Gloo Mesh team, and I've been working on the ambient integration with Gloo Mesh. So I'm going to talk about what's the difference between sidecar versus sidecar-less in ambient mode. What are some UX improvements that Gloo Mesh has done to improve the way you manage your waypoint proxy, and what policies work today and how they work differently in sidecar mode versus sidecar-less. So first, I guess to get started, I'll share my screen and pull up an example I had. So you might be familiar with regular sidecar mode, where in this example I have product page from book info, like a reviews service, and then ratings. And in this example, the sidecar gets injected into the pod. So if you apply an L7 policy like fault injection or header manipulation, you'll see that you have a virtual service that gets created, and that policy gets applied on the client side. So this sidecar on the product page would be the thing enforcing fault injection. In ambient mode, however, we have a slightly different setup. So first of all, you have your ztunnel, which is the L4 proxy currently that will enforce MTLS and authorization policies. But if you want to do any L7 routing or any L7 policies, you need to create a waypoint proxy that will enforce that policy. So you can see, compared to the sidecar mode where the L7 policy happens on the product page sidecar, now the L7 policy is getting applied on the server side on the reviews waypoint proxy, which is a pretty big difference on where the policy gets applied. And the way you create this waypoint proxy in Ambient Istio today is by using the gateway resource. So I have it pulled up here. So basically, using the Kubernetes Gateway API, you define this gateway, you specify the namespace that you want it in, and you can optionally create annotations for specifying the service account you want to create the waypoint for. If you don't add this annotation, it'll create waypoint proxies for everything in your namespace. So another thing that's...
Nina, I apologize. I just realized I forgot to put your screen on.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah, maybe you can recap really quickly. Yeah, sorry.
Cool. So like I mentioned, first I think it's important to talk about the sidecar mode versus sidecar-less and ambient. So here I have an example of the product page reviews and ratings book info example, if you had everything in sidecar mode. So the sidecar you see is injected into the pod, and you have MTLS between the sidecars, and all the L7 and L4 policies are getting applied on the sidecar. And another interesting thing is any L7 policy you have, so be it fault injection or header manipulation, that virtual service is applied on the product page sidecar, so on the client side sidecar. Versus if we take a look at ambient, it's a little different setup because you have the ztunnel, which is the proxy that's controlling all the L4 policies, so MTLS, authorization. This is at the node level, and your waypoint proxy is at the service account level. And any L7 policy you apply is now going to be enforced by this waypoint proxy. So before, when we had fault injection being enforced on the sidecar, now it's being enforced by this waypoint proxy here. So this is different, right? Because instead of the client-side product page enforcing it, now you have to create this waypoint proxy to enforce your L7 policies.
Yeah, that's a great point. I feel like this is something when we first launched Istio Ambient Service Mesh in the launch blog that we didn't highlight particularly, but it's an important caveat for our user that the waypoint proxy has to be there, has to be deployed, has to be running for your layer 7 policy to work, right? It's just not going to work magically as the sidecar case. Well, all you need to do is just inject the sidecar, which you always have it injected.
Yeah, exactly. So if you install Istio, like you'll see the Z tunnels come up per node automatically. But in order to create this waypoint proxy, you have to manually, like before you can apply any L7 policies, like Lynn said, you have to create this waypoint proxy using the Kubernetes Gateway API. And then this is what I was showing before. So this is the an example where we're creating the waypoint proxy and selecting the annotations for bookend for reviews. If you don't specify this annotation here, like you'll create waypoint proxies for everything in that namespace. And as you can see, like it's pretty limited in what you can specify. So other than the annotations and like which namespace this gateway is going to live in, there's very little other configuration you can do. So it's hard to like scale the waypoint proxy up, so you can't have like multiple replicas of it. You can't really determine where it's going to land either. So if I had like another reviews in like node 1, it's you can't guarantee that the waypoint proxy for reviews, if they share a service account, is going to be in node 1 or node 2.
Yeah, I do feel the Istio gateway resource to deploy waypoint proxy is pretty preliminary, like you highlight here, Nina, right? It's very limited configuration, and I do think this is going to be evolving in upstream, but you still have to kind of create the gateway resource and deploy it when the options become available, such as number of replicas, such as like placement information that Nina just talked about.
Yeah, another I think interesting point is, so before when you had your sidecar, you would scale because the sidecar was injected to the pod, right? You would scale the sidecar with the pod, versus now the waypoint proxy is associated with a service account, so it scales separately from the pod, which is also like a big difference between the two models.
Yeah, which brings a lot of benefits, actually. These are some of the benefits we just talked about in our previous episode, I believe it's 38. Well, we talk about what Ambient means to your wallet, right? Because if you have 10 replicas, you don't necessarily need 10 replica of waypoint proxy. If your waypoint proxy 2 or 3 replica handle the layer 7 proxy, then you save yourself from running 10 replica of your paths because you didn't have such a choice in the sidecar world.
Yeah, exactly. So like as you see, like it's also very like invasive kind of having a sidecar per pod. So like every time, like after you inject it, you have to restart the pod. Versus here, it's completely independent of the reviews pod that you have here.
Yeah, that's another great point. So that means if your waypoint proxy has a CVE, which we know there's a lot of CVE with Envoy, then you actually could potentially update your waypoint proxy without touching any of your services that waypoint proxy is serving, right? Because if your reviews or ratings doesn't have any code change, you don't need to restart the pod. All you need to do is update the waypoint proxy. In the sidecar world, that would not be an option because they are bundled together, right? So even though you have to pick up the sidecar for a new CVE, you kind of have to restart the review container as well because you didn't have a choice.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, I guess we can move on to me stop share briefly to actually seeing everything in action. So I have a
Yeah, okay. So before you get that, Nina, let me pick on your brain first.
Yeah, sure.
So I want to ask, so you talk about the difference between sidecar and sidecar-less, right? With Ambient, right? You talk about the difference of implementation, the source was destination side for policies, right?
Mhm.
So you also talk about how it is hard to manage waypoint proxy along with the deployment of the service. So what are some of the UX improvements you are looking at to improve for Gloo Mesh?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the big ones is, like I mentioned, the gateway resource that you have to create manually every time. So the way that Istio handles it is you have a waypoint controller that will look for gateway resources that get created and create a waypoint proxy based on that. But in the Gloo Mesh world, we kind of know when you need an L7 policy enforced because a lot of the policies can be reused, like fault injection can be applied to multiple different like routes, and because we know like which like in what cases you're using your L7 policy, we kind of can control when the waypoint proxy gets deployed and like provide like sane configuration like defaults for that deployment. So one example that is like currently limited in Ambient for deploying your waypoint proxy is like where it actually goes. So there's no way of specifying like pod affinity or like which node your waypoint proxy will end up on. Um, and like this can result in like configurations where if you go from product page to reviews, the waypoint proxy could be on a separate node, so you haven't you go from product page to the waypoint proxy to like reviews, because there's no guarantee that the waypoint proxy will be on the same node as reviews. So that's one big UI improvement that so UX improvement that the Gloo Mesh provides is that we kind of handle the entire lifecycle for you, because we know when like what L7 policies require waypoint proxies and where. So there's kind of two actual like we talked mostly about L7 policies on the virtual service. So like fault injection, mirroring, stuff like that. And that happens on the server side, but some policies also have to happen on the client side. So anything that is on a destination rule, like that requires a traffic policy, so failover, like outlier detection, would still happen on the client side. So you'd need to create a waypoint, like client side waypoint proxy for that. And Gloo Mesh kind of knows which policy you're applying and what kind of waypoints you have to create based on like the APIs that we have in place that like separate the policy you're creating from the actual like virtual service API. So
That's very cool. Hey, I want to say hi to one of our audience. Thank you so much, Bojan, for joining us. Nina, I want to ask you about what's the logic to determine whether you deploy a server-side waypoint proxy automatically versus whether you deploy a client-side waypoint proxy. I think you touch on some of the policies. What's a clear guideline from your perspective?
yeah, so I think anything that requires like a virtual service will be server side. So like header matching, mirror, like fault injection, header manipulation, those all would happen on the server side waypoint proxy. Everything that happens on the traffic policy destination rule would require a client side proxy. So like I think a good example is failover. Failover would happen on is a traffic policy that you define on your destination rule, and that would need a client side waypoint proxy to be able to like correctly enforce it.
And that's assuming that's regardless whether your destination side they have a waypoint proxy or not. Oh,
Um,
that's only when you don't have a waypoint proxy for your destination.
Only when you don't. Yeah. So we don't have duplicate.
Okay,
Yes,
okay.
that's a
That's
good,
why I
good
was a
question.
little bit confused.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
So
Okay.
if you already have like a header manipulation policy in place and you also apply failover, you won't create two duplicate waypoint proxies. We also dedupe that logic because we know like you only need one to do that.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thanks so much for that clarification. I appreciate that. Okay, so the other question before you get to the demo, I want to quickly pick on your brain is what about the existing key features of Gloo Mesh? So correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm thinking about Gloo Mesh, the key features of Gloo Mesh are workspaces, right? So I, as a owner of my particular service, I got to configure, what are my workspaces, what are the isolation, what are the services I can consume, what are the services I can export to, which are the workspaces, and then multi-cluster, instead of me worry about which cluster has which services, I can just deploy um, abstracted resources based on Gloo Mesh API, and then Gloo Mesh automatically figure out for me the generated Istio resources and where to deploy those Istio resources based on where my services are running. Um,
Yeah,
are
so
those the key features, or do you have other stuff
yeah,
in
I
mind?
think the first we can start with workspaces. So workspaces provide like multi-tenancy. So like your application team can have a workspace where it defines its own policies, and a separate application team can have its own policies defined. And you can import and export policies based on like overlap. But for the most part, you can enable like service isolation within your workspace. So you have all of your authorization policies and peer authentication policies automatically created for you for your workspace. So Gloo Mesh kind of handles all of that like isolation for you, which is a really key feature that we have, and it still works in ambient mode because the only thing you have to do is set up your workspace based on the namespaces and clusters you have, and then set up the workspace settings to enable that isolation, and then all of the authorization policies will be created for you still. Because authorization policies now are either enforced on L4 or L7, depending on like if you have the waypoint proxy or not. That still like works seamlessly because if you don't have any waypoint proxies, then everything's still enforced at the L4 level. If you do happen to have a waypoint proxy because like you've created a Gloo Mesh policy, then it'll be enforced at the L7 level, and you can see the logs there as well. So in terms of multi-cluster capabilities, there's some limitations that Ambient currently has with service entries, which doesn't like fully enable all of the multi-cluster support that Gloo Mesh has. So one key feature that Gloo Mesh has is like virtual destinations, where you can define a virtual destination for like reviews global across multiple clusters and then route to all of the clusters seamlessly. That currently is a limitation of Ambient, that it's still like in experimental mode, so like there's still like some development to be done. So the demo I have is going to be in a single cluster environment, but all the policies still work for like kube services, and on a single cluster you can still define like your route tables and stuff like that. And then
Yeah, go ahead. I'll let you finish.
yeah, I'm trying to think what was the last one I had.
Yeah, those are the two things I was asking. Is there any other key features I was missing?
Actually, yes, I forgot. That was my so the ingress gateway features still work as well. So if you like currently there's also limitations on like envoy filters. So a lot of like xdof and like rate limiting features don't work east-west because there's no support for applying like an envoy filter to a waypoint proxy. But everything on the ingress gateway still works. So you can still have an ambient mesh, but an ingress gateway that will enforce like rate limiting, xdof, like other policies that you care about. So that functionality is still there.
That's great. And I assume all you said about that function is there, that function is not there. It's just a time statement, right? Because Ambient is so new, we're constantly work with upstream to improve Ambient, right? Along with like the service entry issue you just mentioned with multi-cluster support. Yeah. All right. I want to hi to our second attendee. Hi, Fitzhugh. Thank you so much for joining us. By the way, Nina and I love to hear from you guys. If you have any questions, this is supposed to be interactive, so feel free just to comment in the chat and I'll bring your messages up so we can answer them. So Nina, I think we're ready to do a demo if you have an environment. Yeah, let me make sure I bring up your screen. All right, let's do that. Yep.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, so let's also if you're interested in trying out Ambient, I'm gonna pitch. Lynn wrote a great blog about how to get started.
Oh, thanks.
And this is just using the regular upstream. So you'll notice that this you have to manage your gateway resource. So if you go to the L4 authorization policy, you'll see that when you do the layer 7, you actually have to create a gateway resource manually. And you'll notice that in my demo, like I don't create any gateway resources just because Gloo Mesh is doing that for me. But this is still like a great guide to try out Ambient. So cool. Okay. Well, so I have the Gloo Mesh. I have 2 clusters. One management cluster where I have the Gloo Mesh management server installed, and one cluster, cluster 1, which is my remote cluster, which has Istio Ambient installed, along with the Gloo Mesh agent and book info. So in this example, I'm going to have 2 workspaces, one book info workspace, which will have, it currently doesn't have any policies. So you'll see that there's no waypoint proxies there. And in my gateway, I just have the virtual gateway and all the ingress gateways defined in a separate workspace just to clean it up there. And then I also have my, on my remote cluster, I have the product page example here, and I have a pod that's like constantly curling this every couple of seconds, so I can generate some data to view in the graph. So here's our little graph of of the book info example. So this is you can see that we actually have the TCP metrics for number of bytes sent, and everything's enforced by MTLS, which is what the little icon means here. So in this example, we're going to have reviews v1, reviews v2, and reviews v3, which all share a service account. And they're going to be on separate nodes. So but product page is going to hit reviews v1, which doesn't hit ratings, and reviews v2, which do hit ratings, but then have different star colors. So like if you look at the result here, like based on the star colors are what you're seeing from ratings getting hit. Cool. Okay, let's actually take a look at the cluster. So here I have all my pods up. So one thing you might notice is that there's no sidecars because we're in ambient mode. So if I look at product page, this one's kind of weird because I have a curl container here just to be able to test some stuff. But everything else is just there's no sidecar injected here. So another thing you might notice is I have the Z-tunnel up. So I have 3 Z-tunnels because I have 3 nodes. So if I look at the nodes in K9 and see what's on each node, I can see that reviews v3 and details are on this node, and they have a Z-tunnel. And here's like the XOF service that we have. And then here's reviews v1 and reviews v2. And they also have a Z-tunnel there as well. Cool. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is apply a route table. So all of Gloo Mesh's APIs still work in ambient mode. So there's no API changes really for the routing and traffic policies and L7 policies that you might want to apply. So in this example, I'm going to apply a route table that has a simple east-west route table for east-west traffic. So it's not selecting a virtual gateway. It's just like doing routing between 2 pods in the mesh. So the 2 routes I have, route 1 doesn't have any header match, but route 2 has this header match where if I specify user and Istio custom user, then I'm going to route to v2, which is the destination that has the stars because it hits ratings, and this one we'll see that it doesn't have any ratings associated with it. So the first thing I'm going to do is apply the route table. And let's...
By the way, which namespace are you apply that route table?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Is there any restriction on that?
Yeah, so I'm applying it to book info, and the way I have my workspace settings set up is I have, like I mentioned, 2 different workspaces. The book info workspace imports gateway. So then this is why we're able to see the book info app like here. Oh, I think it went down. But the gateway settings here just also import and export book info. So they're both import and exported, and service isolation is disabled. So like you can actually access all the services there. So let's go back and look at the pods we have. So you can see before where we didn't have any waypoints, now we have a new booking for reviews waypoint. So if I curl from product page to like reviews without any header, then you can see that I keep getting a response that's good, but it doesn't have any stars associated with it. So now if I add the, so I think I have it copied here. So
user is still customer user.
yes, yeah. I try to mistype it. So if I add the header, I should be hitting now the one with the stars. So you can see that I get the black stars back from that response. And that's consistently happening. So if we go back and look at what's happening on the waypoint, you can see that we actually got some traffic here. So it's hitting like the thing that does the routing goes through the waypoint to determine which reviews the service is going to hit. Cool. Okay, so another thing we can do in addition, so that was just a simple route table. Again, like this is the same API as any sidecar mode that Gloo Mesh supports. The only difference is like what happens with this waypoint proxy. Like it gets brought up and applies the L7 like routing on the server side instead of it happening on the sidecar. Cool. So the next thing I'm going to do is apply a let's apply a L7 policy. So I have a simple fault injection policy that I'm going to test. So again, this is the same API for resilience policies in Gloo Mesh. There's no difference. We're just going to apply it to route 1. So like you're going to see that when we curl, the route 1 was like the basic reviews example that we had. So when we curl reviews, we should see now the 418 response instead of the 200 response with the reviews. So if I apply this, and then go back to the product page, and then go back to the curl container, and then curl it, I can see I get the 418 response here. And then going back, nothing has changed in terms of the waypoint proxy because we're using the same waypoint proxy as we were before. And now just the fault injection is getting applied here. Cool. Let's see, what else do I have? Yeah, so I think the next thing is the custom deployment. So this is one improvement that Gloo Mesh has over the regular Kubernetes gateway is we can actually have a deployment override that we specify. So I have two examples for that. One is just incrementing the replica set, number of replicas. So I'm going to, currently I only have one waypoint proxy, but if I apply this ambient lifecycle manager, I can increase the number of replicas I have because Gloo Mesh provides the opportunity to like override anything in the deployment spec for the waypoint proxy. So you can specify like where it gets deployed, how many replicas, what image to use, stuff like that.
So this ambient lifecycle manager, is that per workspace or that's per namespace?
Yeah, so it's everything is relating to the waypoint proxy is per service account. So this would have to select a service account in the workspace. So if you had like multiple workspaces, you'd want a separate ambient lifecycle manager per workspace to be able to select it, unless you had this like imported. But currently, like it's not like per namespace because it's like it's specifically like selecting a service account that is tied to the waypoint proxy. It's not selecting everything in a namespace.
Okay, so this is an optional thing. If I only need to tweak the configuration of the waypoint proxy beyond what's provided by default. Okay.
Yeah, so let's we'll apply that. Cool. And then if we go back to our pods, we can see we created another one here. So now we have two waypoint proxies. This is also, like I mentioned, useful for the pod affinity, for example. So right now, if I look at the nodes I have, you'll notice that the both waypoint proxies are both being deployed in one node. And that's because the default we're using because we know that it needs the waypoint proxy is for reviews. We're using the oldest deployment to determine which node to add the waypoint by default. But if for whatever reason, if you wanted to do like reviews v2 instead, we can apply that and see what happens. So if I go back, so we're seeing it's terminating. So in this example, I also only have one of them. So there's I instead of having two replicas, just to show the difference. And then if I go back to the nodes, you can see that now it's on this node where reviews v2 is. So.
Very cool. So basically, I have ambient waypoint proxy lifecycle management where I can provide further customization, and we're not just talk about the replica number. There, I guess it could be mostly everything that you would override the Kubernetes YAMLs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, I guess the other thing is, I guess it would be a good practice to kind of, if you have a particular ambient lifecycle configuration you want to use, it's good to have that deploy before you deploy layer 7 policy, right? So when your layer 7 policy is there, you would have the right waypoint proxy automatically provisioned by Gloo Mesh.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, the order doesn't matter. So this, like, you can have this in place before you create the L7 policy or after. But so like if we delete the route table, for example, then the waypoint proxy should get cleaned up. So if we go back, we see that it's getting cleaned up because there's nothing. The fault injection that we have is tied to a route. So there's no route table anymore. So there's no L7 policy to enforce.
Okay, so the only saving, if you do deploy the lifecycle management first, is to save your waypoint proxy from, I guess, redeploy, right?
Yeah.
When you later on attach lifecycle management, maybe it's different. So it's going to be like probably just do a restart or actually scale out more.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Very nice. Yeah, that's a great simplification because I do know some of the feedback we heard from the Istio community was about the lifecycle management. How user would be. It seems pretty primitive just to manage it through the gateway resources. Yeah.
Yeah, and this provides like flexibility of like how many you want, like where you want to deploy, what image you want to use. So all of that is pretty nice. And also, like one thing I've noticed is that in the waypoint controller is, if you are looking at the Istio code, that to see like what actually controls how the waypoint proxy gets created. It's this file here called the waypoint controller. And in the last couple updates to it have been all like just improvements on like making the image policy configurable. So I can imagine there's going to be a lot more improvements there on like what we like how to actually control like where the waypoint gets deployed and stuff like that. But for now, Gloo Mesh does it for you, which is a pretty big improvement to the current model.
Yeah, it's definitely make ambient adoption a lot easier, particularly when user needs layer 7 processing. Yeah. And I think you didn't demo this, but I think you talked about this earlier that you also have logic to determine whether the source and the target is part of the ambient, so that you can leverage that information to determine where you would place the waypoint proxy, either on the source or destination side.
Yeah, there's also that reminds me. One thing I didn't point out is that the namespace I have has, so Bookinfo has the Istio data plane mode label here. And that's what we're using to determine that, like, yes, reviews needs a waypoint. If it didn't have this label, then Gloo Mesh would assume you're like in sidecar mode for that, like, because you can have hybrid modes where not everything in your mesh is in ambient mode. So in that case, like, you would have a sidecar that would be enforcing the policy.
Yeah.
So this
Oh, you
is,
could have no mesh, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. That's very cool. So basically, you check if the pods are in ambient, and then you check source and destination, and the label on the namespace level tells Gloo Mesh, and then you use that information to determine whether you place waypoint proxy on the destination or on the source side.
Yeah, and that's based on the type of policy you're applying. So I think I've pulled up somewhere supported policies. So Gloo Mesh supports a bunch of different policies, and all of these have different. So some of them are tied to like the virtual service that Istio has, and some are tied to like the traffic policy. So like failover and outlier detection are applied to the destination, so they would be applied on the client side. But everything that's applied on the route that is supported in ambient is applied on the server side proxy. So like fault injection, retry, timeouts, they're all route selectors. So you'd need like a waypoint proxy that is on the server side to enforce it.
Interesting. Yeah.
So the
And
same for,
I
yeah.
just making sure we're on the same page. I think the apply to that concept, whether it's on the route and destination, matches to the labels you were showing earlier, right? Because in earlier you showed a fault injection policy where you showed
Yeah.
on a particular route, which you had a label for that route. So that's what that apply to maps to.
Yeah, exactly. So if so fault injection, I also have a header manipulation example. Both of these are applied to routes. And this is just in the Gloo Mesh API for like specifying that you need a route table to apply this policy to. And in ambient mode, this also means that it's going to be applied on the server side because like you need the server side route table to be able to enforce it. Versus like outlier detection or failover, they're both actually like eventually translated into destination rules, and the traffic policy is on the destination rule. So those are both applied to destination. And that's what we mean by like outlier detection being applied to destination is like when you define the outlier detection CR, like you're going to be applying it to a specific destination.
Okay, got it. Yeah. I guess route configuration tends to be a little bit more flexible because you could have multiple routes to a given destination. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, very cool. I actually really like the fact that you can just, apply a label and then be able to apply a particular policy on this particular destination or route. Yeah.
Yeah. It makes it
Without
a lot
like
easier to
learning.
reuse. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Make reuse so much simpler. And also could be a nice separation of roles and personality personas, right? So that maybe a central person can create in the policy, and then you can just use it as a developer to say, hey, I want this particular resilience policy on my routes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. Is there anything else you would like to show, Nina?
I'm trying to think.
So you showed the graph, you showed about the lifecycle management of the waypoint proxy, you showed us a header-based routing, you showed us, I think, some of the
overrides.
overrides. You showed us 418.
Yeah. I think let's see if it might be, so ingress policies still work. I think I have to restart the ingress gateway because there's an HBone issue on the, so I can try applying an ingress policy, but let me restart the gateway first.
So is this a Istio ingress gateway? Or?
Yes, yeah. So this is Istio ingress gateway. I think because we're sending traffic consistently, there's a bug where after a certain while, like there's an issue with the ingress gateway being able to connect to pods in the mesh. But after restarting it, it should be fine. Oh, let's see. Yeah, I think it's just because we're sending so much traffic there. But in theory, let's try it again. Quickly apply the the rate limit policy. If I go, if I think I also have to bring the route table back, but basically the rate limit policy, we have a rate limit server in the pod, in on the remote cluster. So where is it in Gloo Mesh add-ons? So if I apply like an ingress rate limit policy, everything still works because the policy is getting enforced at the ingress level if it's like north-south. But currently, like waypoint proxy, envoy filters don't work, so you won't be able to get east-west rate limiting. But like policies applied to the ingress gateway, like rate limiting and xoff should work. I'm seeing that it's still, let's see if we can restart it again, but it might be a little tricky to show just because I've been sending so much traffic.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's
it's okay.
Well, yeah, but and this works for like any other Gloo Mesh policies. So like xoff, rate limiting, anything that's not fully supported in Ambient will still be like applied on the ingress gateway and function as expected. So
yeah, that's great to do. I guess we need to reanimating our ingress gateway ourselves.
Yeah, I might be able to kill. Let's see. There's it. Yeah.
Yeah, folks, if you guys have any questions, we would love to hear from you or anything particularly that would be interesting. Let's see. Anything else you want to discuss? I think we hit all the major points. Did you just try restarting again?
Oh, is it back? No, I don't think so. I think it might be a starting issue. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that message, demo gods. It's a little bit unpredictable sometimes, but that's the fun of live demo, right? All right. I don't see any further questions, Nina. I think we've kind of talked quite a lot today. So let's do a quick recap on what we talk about. We talk about in ambient, when comparing with sidecar to ambient, a lot of policies are enforced on the destination side with ambient, right? And then we talk about the key features of Gloo Mesh, and we discuss these features we expect to continue to work in Gloo Mesh with Ambient, such as multi-cluster down the road, such as Workspace with multi-tenancy, which is already in place. And on top of the existing feature, we talk about how Gloo Mesh is automatically manage waypoint proxy for you and how you can potentially customize your waypoint proxy deployment through like YAML override with the lifecycle manager. We talk about the UI, the layer 4 telemetry, right, with the mutual TLS icon. That's all provided with just cTunnel without waypoint proxy. And then we talk about apply some of the layer 7 policy, and then you showed how these layer 7 policy in action with just the destination side waypoint proxy. Does that sound like
I think that's covers everything.
Okay, great. Well, I guess I want to thank you, Nina. Thank you so much for joining me on the hood. I feel like I got educated quite a lot on Gloo Mesh and ambient integration too. So thank you for preparing the wonderful demo live to everybody. And folks, if you guys find this interesting, what other topics you would like to see. We're trying to roll out quite a lot of topic about ambient because at Solo we're very excited about ambient. We're also excited about some of the eBPF work we're going to do at Solo. So we plan to have more education session around
Yep.
Istio, around ambient, around eBPF. So definitely reach out to us either on the Hood GitHub or just comment in this YouTube video, and we'll get back to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Nina. Bye, everybody.